Hello and welcome to the second episode of White Dove Works. My name is Adrian and today I'm going to show you how I made my wooden Norris plane. So we're going to start by laying out where to cut off the sides. Because I decided to do a laminated plane construction, and here I'm using my old marking gauge. And then I'm starting the cut with a fine back saw, then switching over to the Ryover saw and cutting it off by hand, which works pretty well. You don't need a table saw for this kind of plane construction. As long as you work your way slowly and concentrated through the wood, you're going to get a pretty pristine surface, which does not require too much refining. So here I cut off the first side and I cut off the second one off camera. Here are our three parts, the two sides and the main body. Now I take my angle gauge to set my bed angle to exactly 42 degrees. And after that I'm transferring it over to the piece of walnut using my marking knife. And then using my tri-square I'm transferring it to the other side. Now I'm establishing a knife wall using a chisel and coming from the side of the material that will be junk anyways. This is a way to get extremely precise cuts, refining it with the knife and then deepening it with a saw before I get into it with the Ryover saw. By this, the saw will be guided from the very first stroke, as you can see here, and it just moves so easily through the material. And it's a lot easier than to do precise cuts, and they really have to be precise when you are about to build a plane. Now I'm marking the point where I will be drilling the hole for the Norris mechanism to go into. I really enjoy drilling holes with the auger, just in the traditional way. Now this auger is not in perfect condition, but it does its job pretty well, so could be worse. I'm measuring if the hole is deep enough, and fortunately it is. Now I'm drilling a second hole that makes it a lot easier to get a recess in there, because you need some space for the whole mechanism to pivot. And this is a very cool thing about the Norris mechanism, because by this you can set the blade very precisely, even if it's a little bit to the left or to the right. Now it's time for the glue up. So first I'm doing a dry assembly here, checking where all the parts should go, and then spreading the glue all over the workpiece. I sprinkle some salt onto the glue here, and these grains of salt will be pressed into the wood fibers when I apply pressure, and will lock the whole thing in place. As long as you glue only two pieces together, it's not a big deal. But if there are more, these pieces will start to move relative to each other as soon as you apply clamping pressure. The grains of salt lock the thing in place and will prevent that. That way you get a glue up that is very precise and requires almost no refining afterwards. Notice that I left the blade in there to make sure that my mouth has the right dimensions. Now clamp the whole thing together. Okay, looks good. I'll be back tomorrow. The glue has dried and it's time to check what we got. You can see there are some spots where a lot of glue has been squeezed out, and I'm going to take a knife and just scrape it off. Now since I don't have a plane, and I would also find it pretty funny to use a plane to build a plane, I will just use this technique of gluing sandpaper to a piece of melamine to flatten all the sides. And here's what we got. Now I'm marking where to drill the hole for the beam, the brass pin, that will secure my wedge. Then I'm transferring it to the other side to make sure these holes align perfectly. Now I put this piece of scrap in there because I don't want any tear out as I drill the hole. Now some refining with a file because my auger bit is just slightly too small for my brass pin to fit in perfectly. Next up we're going to make our wedge. I will also use walnut and try to find a piece that has about the same color as the other pieces that I used. Cutting it off with my Ryobi saw. Now putting the brass pin in there. And doing a test fit for the wedge. It goes in there perfectly. Now we'll refine its shape a little bit and bring down the brass pin. It's always good to have a sharp file at hand. Now I put the wedge in there and flatten the sole again in working configuration, meaning the iron is in there, the wedge is in there, and the whole plane is set up as if I would like to plane with it. This is important because as the wedge brings tension into the system, the body of the plane slightly deforms, and you really want to make sure that the sole is flat when it's set up for planing. Now I'm cutting out a template for the tote of my plane, and I'll be gluing it onto a piece of walnut. We're now coming to the end of this first part of my plane building video, so make sure to head over to the second part if you want to see how I went on with this project and how the finished plane turned out. Thank you very much for your support. Leave a comment if you liked the video, or also if you didn't like it, because I'm always happy for feedback, and have a nice day.